Hi, I'm Maura. Imagine buying a house for your parents, only to find out you weren't even invited to the party celebrating it. They laughed under my roof, toasted without me, and acted like I never existed. But the truth, the deed, was in my pocket all along. How did it come to this? Before we dive in, tell me, have you ever been left out by the very people who should have protected you? The snow muffled everything that night. Sounds, lights, even memories. I parked a block away, my breath fogging up the windshield as I sat there, staring at the house I bought. From a distance, it looked like a postcard scene, golden windows glowing against the white night, laughter floating through the cracks of closed doors. Everyone was there. Everyone but me. I stepped out into the cold, pulling my coat tighter around me. My boots crunched lightly against the snow as I made my way toward the house. No one greeted me at the door. No one even noticed as I slipped quietly inside, the warmth brushing against my frozen skin like an afterthought. Inside, it was louder, brighter. Lorraine sparkled at the center of it all, basking in attention like a sun that burned too brightly. My mother, Marlene, stood close by, clutching a wine glass, laughing too loudly about how much they had struggled to buy the house, how proud they were to have finally made it. I watched her lips move, forming words that erased me as if I had never existed in the foundation of the walls she praised. I hovered near the edge of the crowd, invisible. Someone, an uncle I barely remembered, leaned in to joke. "Good thing Lorraine handled everything. You know how it is with the other one." A ripple of laughter. Marlene didn't correct him. She tilted her glass instead, the ice clinking like tiny bells. My father, Franklin, nodded absently, his eyes darting past me like I was just another shadow on the wall. I squeezed my hands into fists inside my coat pockets, feeling the crinkle of paper, the deed, my silent proof that I wasn't a figment of their selective memory, that without me, none of this would have been possible. I stood there for a moment longer, feeling the weight of everything I had tried to ignore for years pressing down on my chest. They hadn't simply forgotten me. They had chosen to erase me inch by inch until I stood there a stranger among blood. I clutched the deed tighter, the corners digging into my palm, grounding me. They could wear my sacrifices like borrowed jewelry, but they couldn't take away the one thing that mattered now, the truth. Breathing in slowly, letting the cold, crisp air sting my lungs, I stepped deeper into the crowd. Unseen, but not for long. When I was 9, my mother announced that Lorraine and I would share a birthday party that year. She said it was practical. "Saves time, saves money." Her voice chipper, almost as if it were a gift rather than a subtraction. I had nodded, not understanding. I only knew birthdays were supposed to be special, and maybe, if we celebrated together, it would feel even bigger. The day arrived with a warm, early spring sun outside, but inside the house, it was decorated in nothing but Lorraine's favorite shades of pink and silver. Balloons floated near the ceiling. A banner that read, "Happy Birthday, Lorraine," stretched across the living room wall. No mention of me, not even a corner or a side note. I stood quietly in the corner, wearing a new dress my grandmother had bought me, feeling small in a sea of glitter. When the cake came out, I caught my breath. It was a massive sheet cake, covered in delicate white frosting, adorned with Lorraine's name in looping, beautiful letters. Nothing about it felt shared. I waited for someone, anyone, to notice. Maybe there would be a second cake, a smaller one just for me. Or maybe my name was hidden on the side where I couldn't see. I stared until my eyes blurred, willing someone to say, "Oh, and for Maura too." But they didn't. As the party buzzed around me, I slipped away into the kitchen. From my toy baking kit, I had made a small cake the night before, staying up late to decorate it with shaky, crooked lettering. It was my secret hope, a way to be part of the celebration. I pulled it from where I had hidden it, cradling it carefully. I approached my mother, holding out my tiny offering, heart pounding. She glanced down, smiled vaguely, and patted my head. She didn't even take it from my hands. A few minutes later, distracted by guests, I left it on the counter, hopeful it would find its place. Hours later, after the presents were unwrapped and the guests had gone, I wandered back into the kitchen. My little cake was gone. I found it in the trash, smashed under a used paper plate, the frosting smeared into a sad blur. No one said anything, no one apologized. It was as if it had never existed. Standing in the kitchen doorway, staring at the crumpled remains, something inside me quietly shifted. It wasn't anger, not yet, just a hollow, cold spot forming where expectation had once lived. Now, back at the housewarming party, years later, I watched Lorraine laugh, her head thrown back, glittering in a sea of familiar faces. No one looked my way. No one even remembered I existed beyond a distant obligation. I tightened my jaw, feeling the old scar stretch and pulse beneath the surface. I had learned long ago how invisible I could be to them, and I was done pretending I didn't know. The summer sun was unrelenting that afternoon, washing the wedding venue in a golden haze that only made everything feel more surreal. I remember stepping out of my car, smoothing down the wrinkled dress clinging awkwardly to my frame. It smelled faintly of mothballs and regret, an heirloom of sorts, handed down not with pride but with convenience. The guests glittered in fresh linens and polished shoes. Lorraine stood in the center of it all, radiant in her designer gown, every sequin a tiny exclamation mark to her perfection. She was the universe everyone orbited around, and I was the space between stars, necessary but unseen. Inside, the chandeliers caught every angle of Lorraine's happiness, throwing light onto her like a blessing. I shuffled along the edges of the room, hyper-aware of the scratchiness of my sleeves, the slight tear in the hem that I hadn't been able to fix. When we lined up for family pictures, I tried to find a place that wouldn't ruin the symmetry. As the photographer rearranged us, I heard Marlene's voice behind me, sweet, syrupy, meant for the guest she was charming. "Oh, Maura, she's just here to fill the frame." She laughed lightly, as if it was a harmless thing to say, as if I hadn't heard every word. I froze, feeling the blood rush to my ears. I smiled tightly for the camera because that was what was expected. A prop, not a daughter, not even a real participant in the day. The reception was a blur of toasts and dancing and clinking glasses. I floated among the bodies, a ghost only visible when needed. I sat alone at a table far from the center, picking at the frosting on my slice of wedding cake, wondering if anyone would notice if I slipped out the side door and disappeared. No one did. And somewhere, in that still, aching silence, something inside me hardened. I realized then that no matter how tightly I clung to them, they would never reach back. I was a placeholder in their lives, a piece of background furniture they rearranged when convenient. Now, years later, standing in the house that bore none of my fingerprints, but every bit of my sacrifice, I watched Lorraine laughing again, surrounded by admiration. The faces around her blurred in my vision, not from tears, but from distance I had placed there. My fingers brushed the folded paper in my pocket. This time it wasn't hope that fluttered against my fingertips. It was certainty. Graduation day should have tasted sweet. The air was filled with the scent of cut grass and blooming lilacs as I scanned the bleachers, heart fluttering against my ribs. Caps and gowns flooded the stadium like a sea of dreams fulfilled, and I was one among them, waiting, no, yearning, for a face to find me in the crowd. When Marlene and Franklin finally appeared, they were rushed, distracted. Marlene was adjusting her sunglasses. Franklin barely looked up from his phone. They waved briefly, a casual flick of the wrist, as if attending my graduation was a mild inconvenience to be ticked off a list. After the ceremony, I found them near the entrance. Marlene hugged me lightly, pressing an envelope into my hand with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Congratulations, honey," she said. I clutched it to my chest, feeling a bloom of hope despite everything. Later, alone in my room, I opened it. Empty. No card, no note, no money. Nothing but blank air and the faint scent of Marlene's perfume lingering on the paper. I sat there for a long time, turning the envelope over and over, as if something might appear if I stared hard enough. But emptiness, once recognized, cannot be unseen. Months later, I visited home. Lorraine's latest certificates and awards lined the hallway. Best attendance, top of her online marketing course, minor milestones framed and exalted like sacred relics. I searched quietly, foolishly, for a photo of me in my cap and gown. A small frame tucked on a dusty shelf maybe, a snapshot on the fridge, anything. There was nothing. When I asked Marlene, she shrugged. "Maybe it got lost, dear," she said, her voice breezy, as if misplacing pride was no big tragedy. I laughed. It slipped out before I could stop it, a brittle sound, startling even to me. Standing there, surrounded by reminders of what mattered to them, I realized my victories had always been invisible unless they could be paraded around to reflect their own imagined greatness. Success had isolated me more than failure ever could. Now, at the housewarming party, I glanced around the living room. Lorraine's wedding photos adorned the mantel. Her children's soccer trophies gleamed under special lighting. There was still no trace of me, not a graduation photo, not a college acceptance letter, not even a forgotten dusty frame tucked behind newer ones. Just a blank space where belonging should have been. My eyes lingered on it, a hollow between glossy memories not meant for me, and for the first time, I didn't ache. I understood. It was supposed to be just another family dinner, a casual Sunday gathering, something easy and familiar. But by then, even breathing the same air as them felt like a battle I wasn't sure was worth fighting anymore. I arrived a little late, arms full of a pie I had baked the night before, a bottle of wine tucked awkwardly into my purse. Through the window, I could already see them seated, faces lit by the overhead light, a small galaxy spinning without me. When I pushed the door open, the laughter barely faltered. No one had saved me a seat. Lorraine's kids crowded around the main table, their plates piled high, voices overlapping in endless stories. Chairs were tight, elbows jostling in the comfortable way families sometimes do when they know there's no danger of being pushed out. Franklin finally noticed me and muttered something to Marlene, who waved her hand distractedly. Someone dragged a chair out from the corner, a rickety old thing that wobbled when I touched it, and wedged it against the wall, closer to the kitchen than the table. I set my pie down, trying not to crumble along with it. From my makeshift perch, I watched the evening unfold. Conversations ebbed and flowed like tides, always circling the same few people, never quite reaching me. Plates passed by with mechanical precision, sometimes a fork, sometimes a napkin, rarely a glance. I listened to Lorraine brag about her new project, another marketing scheme that was more fantasy than plan, and watched as Marlene beamed at her like she had just announced she was curing cancer. I laughed once, softly, at one of Dennis's bad jokes, but the sound evaporated before it could reach anyone. The chair creaked under me, a steady reminder that even in spaces I helped build, I would always be made to feel temporary, disposable. When dessert was served, a tray of cupcakes balanced in Lorraine's manicured hands. Mine was the last one taken, handed to me almost as an afterthought, frosting already smudged, crushed slightly at the corner. I swallowed it anyway, the sweetness bitter in my mouth. Later, as I stood to leave, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. For a fleeting second, I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me, her spine too straight, her mouth too still. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was something colder, quieter. At the housewarming party now, that same feeling wrapped itself around me like a second skin. I scanned the polished new walls, the expensive furniture, the neatly arranged tables, and knew. It had never been about space. It had never been about chance. They had decided long ago where I belonged. I clenched my fork tighter at the memory, my knuckles whitening. They had chosen to forget. I was about to remind them. Every night that week, I checked my phone like a ritual. Dinner done, dishes stacked neatly in the sink, I would settle onto the couch, blanket tucked around my legs, pretending to scroll through articles or news. But really, I was waiting for a text, a call, an email, anything. Deep down, I knew it wouldn't come. Still, the hope lingered, a stubborn ember that refused to die, no matter how cold the air between us had become. I told myself maybe they were still organizing. Maybe they hadn't finalized the guest list. Maybe they wanted to surprise me. Hope is cruel that way. It dresses itself up as reason. The truth slipped out in the most casual way imaginable. A neighbor I barely knew waved to me as I brought in the mail one afternoon. "Are you going to the housewarming next weekend?" she chirped, cheerful, her arms full of groceries. The air froze between us. I didn't get the details yet, I lied, my voice steady in a way my heart wasn't. Oh, must have gotten lost in the shuffle, she said, shrugging, already shifting her bags to head inside. Everyone's talking about it. Big event. I stood on my front steps long after she disappeared, the groceries in my arms growing heavier by the second. That night, I called Marlene. I kept my voice light, breezy, asked about the party, asked if they had set a date yet. She hesitated, just a beat, but long enough, and then laughed a little too brightly. We're still planning, honey, you know how it is. Nothing set yet. It was the same tone she used when she told me Santa Claus couldn't find our house that one Christmas I cried over an empty stocking. And just like then, I didn't believe her. I hung up the phone and stared at the ceiling for a long time, letting the silence fill the room until it pressed against my skin. They hadn't forgotten. They hadn't made a mistake. They had simply decided I wasn't worth a chair at their table. Something inside me, the last flimsy bridge strung with apologies and excuses, snapped. By the time the housewarming night arrived, I no longer waited for invitations. I no longer wondered if maybe I had misunderstood. I knew exactly where I stood. And I knew exactly what I was about to do. My lips pressed into a thin, hard line as I stood at the edge of the crowd, unseen, the folded deed heavy in my pocket. If they wanted a celebration without me, they were about to get one they wouldn't forget. I didn't mean to hear them. I wasn't lurking or searching for ammunition. I had simply drifted unnoticed to the edge of the living room, where the laughter was a little thinner, the walls a little closer. That's where I heard it, Uncle Peter's voice, warm with wine, chuckling. Some families just have a lost cause, he said. Thank God Lorraine turned out so well. Marlene's laugh followed, light and false. Franklin's low grunt of agreement. I stood very still, my fingertips brushing the seam of my coat pocket where the folded deed waited like a living thing. My heart didn't break this time. It hardened, cooling into something steady, something sharp. There was nothing left to pretend for. I pulled in a slow breath, the kind you take before stepping off a ledge. In the sea of bodies and music and clinking glasses, I stepped forward, unnoticed at first. Just another shadow at the margins. But when I reached the center of the room, I cleared my throat, a small, clean sound that cut through the din like a blade. The conversations faltered, then stopped. All eyes turned toward me. From my coat, I pulled out the crisp white paper, unfolding it slowly. The deed caught the light, stark and undeniable. This house, I said, my voice steady, belongs to me. A silence settled so heavy it felt almost physical, pressing down on the party until the only sound was the soft whir of the ceiling fan overhead. Faces shifted from confusion to embarrassment to something colder, fear. Marlene blinked rapidly, her mouth working around words that never came. Franklin looked at his shoes like they might offer a map out of this moment. Lorraine's lips pressed into a thin, furious line. I kept talking, low and even. I bought it. I maintained it. I own it. No shouting, no accusations. Just the truth, laid bare like a wound no one could deny. Whispers rippled through the guests. Distant relatives glanced at one another, suddenly unsure of where loyalty should land. Marlene finally found her voice. Darling, this is a private event. This is my house, I said again, calm and final. No one moved to stop me when I turned toward the door. No one dared. I didn't look back as I gathered my coat tighter around me, the deed still clutched in my hand like a battle flag folded neat against my ribs. I didn't wait for apologies or explanations. I didn't crave them anymore. I had all the proof I needed. As I reached the door, I heard Marlene's voice crack behind me, a sharp, desperate sound, half-formed and too late. I didn't stop walking. I stood at the doorway for a moment longer, the cold seeping into my skin through the thin layer of my coat. Inside, the air buzzed with discomfort, whispers scraping against the silence I had left in my wake. My eyes found Marlene's first. There was no apology there, only wounded pride and a sharp, unyielding resentment. Franklin couldn't meet my gaze at all, his hands fiddling with the hem of his sweater like a boy caught lying. Lorraine's eyes burned, not with guilt, but fury. I breathed in the moment, memorized the shape of their faces, the way they closed ranks without me. And then I turned away. Each step toward the door felt like dragging a ship through sand, heavy with years of swallowed words and forced smiles. But with every inch farther from them, my lungs filled easier, my spine straightened. My life, long shackled to the weight of their expectations, began to uncoil, stretching into something lighter. The snow outside was fresh, untouched, the night swallowing my figure as soon as I stepped into it. I didn't pause. I didn't glance over my shoulder. I simply walked, the crunch of my boots the only sound in the thick, forgiving dark. The driveway stretched out before me like a blank page, and I carved a path through it, one set of footprints, lonely and perfect. I didn't wonder if they watched me go. I didn't care. At the curb, I hesitated. Not for them, but for me. I turned slightly, enough to glimpse the trail I had carved behind me, narrow and straight, leading from the house that had never been mine to the life that now would be. I smiled, small and real, feeling it anchor deep into my bones. They had never chosen me. But tonight, I chose myself. The engine of my car growled to life under my hands. I slipped it into drive, my headlights cutting twin paths through the falling snow. I didn't look into the rearview mirror. Mornings were quieter now. The soft whir of the heater, the gentle creak of old floorboards, the hush of snow melting outside my apartment window. I woke with no expectations weighing down my chest, no invisible list of ways to prove my worth before the day could begin. For the first time, silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like breathing. Sometimes, news drifted in through mutual acquaintances. Lorraine's marketing endeavors had dried up. Marlene and Franklin's retirement fund, stretched too thin, had begun to fray at the edges. Whispers of foreclosure, mounting bills, desperation. I listened. I nodded when people thought I didn't know. But I didn't feel triumph, only a soft, muted sorrow. The kind you feel when a house you once loved collapses under the weight of its own rot. I wasn't responsible for their undoing. I had simply stepped aside and let the truth finish what I never could. Little by little, I rebuilt. Coffee dates with friends I had drifted from. Therapy sessions where I learned my worth wasn't a conditional prize. Long walks under wide skies that reminded me how small one house, one family, really was in the grand, forgiving sprawl of the world. I worked, I rested. I learned how to choose peace even when anger would have been easier. Family, I realized, wasn't stitched in blood. It was built, day by patient day, in trust, in laughter, in the quiet acts of love that never asked for applause. I chose a new family now, piecemeal, imperfect, deliberate. Friends who showed up, colleagues who respected me, myself most of all. One chilly afternoon, I found myself at the old park near my childhood home. The swings were rusted now, the sandbox swallowed by weeds. I sat on a bench, the wind tugging at the ends of my scarf, and whispered a soft goodbye to the little girl who once waited there, for approval, for affection, for a place she never had to earn. She didn't wait anymore. I stood, brushed the snow from my coat, and walked forward, carving a new path in the world that didn't require anyone else's permission. Maura smiles to herself, feeling free as she walks further into the golden horizon. Life taught me that sometimes the families we are born into are not the families that choose us, and that's okay. Walking away from what hurts isn't weakness, it's the purest form of courage. I realized I could build a home within myself, one not dependent on anyone else's approval. Healing isn't linear, and forgiveness isn't always required to move forward. What about you? Have you ever had to choose yourself over the people you thought would always stand by you? I'd love to hear your story. Leave a comment below. Tell me if this story resonated with you by typing 1" or share where you're watching from. And if this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to this channel for more journeys of resilience and hope. Together, we keep moving forward.